Okay, here's a video I don't wanna film. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about something that has kind of come up inevitably that I don't necessarily want to talk about, but it's something that I think I need to make a video about so I can make future videos about it. But in a few of my videos I've brought up that I have OCD. I've had OCD since I was a kid. And I was diagnosed with it formally when I was 18. And some people have commented on those videos where I do mention that I have OCD, saying that they have OCD and that they can relate, and that they're happy to see somebody talking about it in a very normal day-to-day way. And a lot of people asking me about how I cope with having OCD and anxiety and also do magical work, do spiritual work, and how you can tell the difference between anxiety, compulsions, intrusive thoughts versus intuition and psychic abilities. And I want to be able to make videos about all those things, but I feel like it'll be easier to understand where I'm coming from and the advice I'm giving and just my perspective on it if you guys understand what my OCD is like, where my OCD comes from, and what having OCD is like for me personally. So that's why I'm making this video. I'm also making this video because honestly, I'm hoping that some people can relate to it and some people will see this video and feel less alone. Having OCD can be a very lonely experience. You can feel like you're a nut job. It can feel like even your own brain isn't on your side. So I'm hoping that this video will help more people to feel less alone. And honestly, I'm hoping that we can have a little community of OCD havers and we can kind of lean on each other and talk about it. So if you have OCD, definitely comment down below so we can all connect. But yeah, that is why I'm making this video. I don't necessarily want to. I don't love talking about this, especially so openly with so many people. Normally I kind of pick and choose who I let in about my mental illness, because I don't just have OCD, but we're just talking about OCD today. Maybe we'll talk about the other ones in the future, but right now we're just talking about OCD. So before we get into talking about my personal experience of OCD, let's first talk a little bit about what OCD is. And before we do that, little disclaimer, I am not a therapist. I am not a mental health practitioner. I do not know anything from a school standpoint about mental illness. I'm just someone who has mental illness. I have had several handful of therapists that I've learned from. I've read a lot of books about OCD and anxiety to try to cope with mine, but that in no way qualifies me to tell you how to deal with your OCD. If you are having severe mental health problems that are impacting your ability to thrive, your ability to function, you need to seek help from a mental health care practitioner. Your mental health is not something to play around with. If you are feeling like your thoughts are out of control, or you're afraid of what you might do because you're feeling the way you're feeling, reach out to someone who can help you. I will link down below hotlines that you can call if you are in a dire situation and need help right now. I also would like to preface this video by saying that you are not alone. If you are in the depths of mental illness and you are having a really bad day, a really bad week, a really bad month, a really bad year, I want you to know that you're not alone and nothing can last forever. No feeling will last forever. You're not going to feel like this forever. Just let that sink in. I don't want you to think that your mental illness is the end of the road for you. You're never going to feel better. You're never going to have a good quality of life. There is hope, and you can learn to cope with your mental illness. You can learn to heal as much as you can and deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and you will get to a point where you're having way more good days than you are bad days. So I want to preface this video with that. And if you do feel alone, comment down below that you feel alone in your mental illness journey, and I guarantee you that several people will comment and say that they feel the same way or a similar way. So you are not alone. So now that we've done our little disclaimer, let's talk about what OCD is. OCD stands for Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and OCD is a neurological disorder where you're inundated with intrusive thoughts that feel very real. And OCD can be different for everyone that has it. There are many, many, many different kinds of OCD. If you think of OCD as an umbrella term, there are all these different branches underneath it that are specific kinds of OCD. So when someone says they have OCD, that could mean that they have a certain kind of OCD. It could mean that they have a couple different kinds of OCD. And like I said, two people can have OCD and have completely different experiences of OCD. Something that people with OCD can all agree on, though, is intrusive thoughts, anxiety, and doing compulsions. And because I'm not a therapist and I'm not any kind of expert on mental illnesses or OCD specifically, I'm not going to talk too much about the different kinds of OCD. I'm just going to focus on my experience of OCD and the OCD that I know. So if you want to know more about all the different kinds of OCD, you can research that on your own or find a therapist or a healthcare practitioner that can explain those things for you. Also, I'm sure there are so many YouTube videos about OCD made by therapists. So if you want to know more about the facts of OCD, you can go look at those, because I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and say something that's not true. So if you want to know more about the facts of OCD, do some research outside of this video. I'm going to focus on my experience of OCD. I also want to say, before we get more into this video, and this is just something I have to say for my own peace of mind, don't comment on this video that you're so OCD. You either have OCD or you don't. And if you don't have OCD, you don't know what it's like. OCD is not needing the picture on the wall to be straight. OCD is not liking things a certain way. Of course, that can come into play if you have a lot of other OCD symptoms, but I just want to start this video with it being understood that it's kind of like trendy to be like, oh, I'm so OCD, or like, oh yeah, I'm OCD too. OCD is not an adjective. It's not a describing word. OCD is a disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. It's not something you have that's like quirky and fun. It's not like, oh, fix that picture on the wall because it's bothering me. Or like, oh, I need all my pens to be organized from short to tall. No. You might just be a control freak. Or you might just be really anal about how things are organized. That doesn't make you have OCD. Okay? So I just need to preface it with that, because I so often will tell people I have OCD and then I get the response, oh, I'm so OCD, or I'm OCD too. That as a sentence doesn't even make sense. Unless you have OCD, you don't have OCD. So hopefully that makes sense. So don't comment on this video if you don't have something to say about a genuine OCD experience. It's very invalidating and belittling to say to someone who has OCD that you're so OCD. So don't say that. It's a really messed up thing to say. Yeah. So all that being said, let's get into my personal story of OCD. So OCD and anxiety run in my family. Oh boy, do they. My dad had severe OCD and anxiety. My grandfather on my mom's side had severe anxiety to the point where he wouldn't leave the house, and he actually ended up dying because he was too afraid to go to the doctor, and he died from something very simple and easily cured. And there are other family members that possibly had anxiety and OCD, but we don't know enough about their experience because it's too far back and they're not alive anymore to know for sure. But I have a few different people for sure on my mom's side and my dad's side that have either anxiety or OCD. So It runs in my family. I'm predisposed to it. It's in my genes. Lucky me. And my sister also has anxiety. She doesn't have OCD, but she does have severe anxiety. So as a kid, I can remember doing compulsions and having intrusive thoughts from a very, very young age. I think the first time I can remember doing a compulsion was when I was 11. I can remember that my OCD kind of started out as just this narrative in my head that I had to do everything right or something bad would happen. And when I say do everything right, my brain made that up as I went. So basically what that would mean is I remember I had a lot of weird obsessive compulsive behavior with the bathroom, especially. Every time I went to the bathroom in a public place, I would have to, and again, this is really uncomfortable for me. I'm gonna try to do my best to be open and honest about my experience and share as much information with you guys as possible. Wow, I really didn't think this would be that hard. So I'm gonna try to share as much detail as possible about my experience with OCD so that other people can understand where I'm coming from, and hopefully other people who have similar experiences can relate and share their experience. But I'm gonna share some stuff that's really hard for me to share. I feel really embarrassed sharing it because it sounds crazy out loud, but in my head, it's so real. So be kind, please. It's not easy for me to share these things, and it's embarrassing, and I have a lot of shame around it that I'm still working on. So while you're watching, please keep that in mind and be kind. But I had a lot of weird obsessive compulsive behavior with the bathroom as a kid. Every time I would go to the bathroom in a public place, where there are like stalls, specifically stalls, not if it was like, I didn't have this if it was like a private bathroom where you shut the door, but if it was like a big public bathroom with a lot of stalls in it, like at a movie theater or at a school, I had this whole like routine I would have to do, or something bad would happen. That's what my brain would tell me. So like I would have to go into the stall. Once I sat on the toilet, I would have to lift my feet up so no one could see that I was in the stall, because in my brain there was someone watching me. And it wasn't even like I thought there was like a tangible someone. It was like I felt there was like an energetic universal someone that was like watching me and making sure I did it right. It was like I felt like the universe was watching me, and if I did it wrong, something bad was going to happen and it was going to be my fault. So what I would have to do is I'd have to go into the stall, I'd have to lift my feet up off the ground so no one could tell I was in the bathroom. I would have to make sure if I had any bags or anything with me, they couldn't be on the ground. They had to be hung up high, but not on the top hook, on the middle hook. You know how like most bathrooms have like a double hook situation? And let me tell you, if there wasn't a double hook situation, I was keeping that bag on me, because if there isn't a medium hook and not a very top hook, I can't hang it there. I just can't. As a kid, I would have to do those things, and then I would go to the bathroom, and I would have to take an even amount of squares of toilet paper, and I wouldn't rip them individually. They had to stay intact. So if I messed it up, I would have to do it again. So I would have to take an even amount of toilet paper. So I would count the little squares. Usually I would take groups of 2. As a kid, I was very obsessed with groups of 2 and just the number 2 in general and even numbers. I'm still pretty obsessed with even numbers. I'm trying to work on it. I've gotten a lot better. But I would have to take groups of 2 is usually what I would do. I would like rip 2, rip 2, rip 2, and then I would use that. Or however many I needed. And then I would be okay. I also, as a kid, had a lot of weird obsession with, I'm gonna try to stop using the word weird. Whew! As I said, I still have like a lot of shame and embarrassment around this stuff. So honestly, I'm gonna say I'm sorry to myself and to anyone else who has OCD for continuing to say that they're weird. They might be weird to some people, but it's my disorder and it's my mental illness, and it's not something to be ashamed of. Even if I feel shame, I know factually that I don't need to be ashamed of anything. It's a struggle that I have. So I'm going to try to be more conscious of my wording going through the rest of this video and not call my behavior weird, even though I feel like I have to justify it and explain that I know it's weird. I also had a lot of compulsions with the clock. I went to a public school that had those like big, huge clocks on the wall in every single room. So no matter what class I was in, I would have this thing where any kind of analog wall clock, I would be obsessed with the time, and I would be obsessed with when I look at the clock and when I look away from the clock. I had a lot of specific things like needing to look at the clock at a certain time, needing to not look at the clock too many times. I would look at the clock and pay attention to what second the one hand was on, and I would count until I got to an even number, and then I would look away really quick to make sure I didn't end on an odd number. I would have thoughts like, if you look at the clock again before it becomes noon, one of your family members is going to die, or your cat's going to run away and you're never going to see them again. I had a lot of thoughts like that. So I would have a lot of like paying attention to the clock, not trying to intentionally not pay attention to the clock, and then trying to intentionally pay attention to the clock. It was like a lot of obsession with the numbers on the clock and how many times I looked at the clock. I also, as a child, and this is something I still have, needed fabric to be flat and even. I still to this day, like I can't, like folding laundry is the worst thing for me. Like if I could afford to have someone do all my laundry all the time, like start to finish, I would, because I cannot fold clothes. Like it takes me up to like on a bad day, it'll take me like an hour and a half to fold one load of laundry, and not even like a big load of laundry. Changing the sheets is really hard for me. Folding towels is really hard for me. Since I was a kid, I had this obsession with like tags on things. So I would honestly, well, now as an adult, now that I've learned to cope with my OCD more and set myself up for success, you can see my dog's head looking out the window. Okay, distraction. I've learned that if I just, as soon as I get something, I just cut the tag off, and that helps me a lot. But I had this obsession as a kid, and still do, with tags, and they needed to be like flat. If they were bent, like if you folded something and the tag was like crumpled up or like folded in half, I would lose it. Like I would go fix it. It had to be correct. And the same with like my clothing that I'm wearing, like nothing can be folded. Like, you know how a t-shirt will often like fold at the end or kind of roll up at the end? I would have to like make sure it was flat and pressed even and like just completely flat. I still to this day cannot sleep if my shirt is like bunched up. Like I have to like reach under myself and kind of scooch to flatten it out, and then I can fall asleep. Or even like my blankets, I need all my blankets on my bed to be like even and correctly placed, and like I can't have extra of one and not enough of the other. Like I will literally strip the whole bed and fix it if it's not correct, because I won't be able to sleep. So those are all things that started when I was a kid. Mainly I just had as a kid this overreaching idea that there was something, or there was something that was out to get me. As a kid, I had a lot of scary stuff happen to me, I guess is how I would describe it. I was a very quiet and to myself child. I've always been kind of a loner. I'm very introverted, so I'm not crazy talkative. If you get me going about something I'm passionate about, I'll go on and on and on. Or if I'm feeling safe in the environment I'm in, I'll talk a lot. Like if I'm with friends I trust, then I talk a lot. In your average day-to-day life, I'm not that talkative, and I'm more introverted to myself, and I'm very internal. I'm a Pisces too, so I'm very in my own head. I'm a daydreamer. I'm very into thoughts. I'm very into thinking. I enjoy thinking. So as a kid, I was like that even more. And because of that, I kind of didn't really get a lot of attention as a kid. I seemed really fine all the time because I wasn't outwardly expressing myself as much. So I didn't get as much attention from family, from friends, from teachers. They always kind of just assumed I was just the quiet one, and they never really paid much attention to me. So I think that left a lot of room for me to create my own world in my head because no one was really paying much attention to me. So as a kid, I really just, to cope with a lot of factors in my life that were very uncertain, I created this whole world in my head where I could protect myself, if that makes sense. I felt like I didn't know how to stay safe. I didn't have a good sense of security and safety, so I created this whole world in my head, these compulsions and obsessions that would protect me, which of course don't protect me. They just kind of make my life harder. That all started as when I was a kid. I can remember doing these compulsions at 9, 10, 11, and I can remember having these intrusive thoughts even before that, before they developed into compulsions. And it really was mostly just that feeling of, if you don't do this, then this will happen, and it will be your fault. That was really stressed to me in my own brain. I always felt very overly responsible. And if you are someone with OCD and you don't know the term over responsibility, definitely research it and figure out your relationship with over responsibility. I never knew what over responsibility was, or that it was even a thing, until I started going to therapy when I was 18, and we're going to talk about that later. But I had, even as a child, a lot of over responsibility. I felt like everything was my fault. Everything that went badly wrong was my fault. And I was responsible for making sure that nobody died. I was responsible for making sure that I stayed safe and that everyone I loved stayed safe. I was responsible for if something bad happened to my cat. I was responsible for if something bad happened at home. I was responsible for if someone got mad at me. I was responsible for if someone was upset. It was just anything bad that could happen was my fault in my eyes. So that put a lot of weight on me as a child. I didn't know how to deal with that, and I honestly still don't. So that's really where it all stemmed from for me. So I was having all these intrusive thoughts, and at around 11 is when I started doing compulsions. It's when it kind of evolved into me actually physically doing compulsions because of those intrusive thoughts and obsessions. And then when I was 13 is really when things started to get much worse. When I was 13, my dad got diagnosed with cancer, so that was a lot of added stress on my body. And then the next year after that, when I was 14, my mom got diagnosed with cancer, and then my mom got diagnosed with another cancer a few months later. So, and we're going to talk more about that in the future. I actually made a documentary about it, so if you want to know more about that, that'll be in the Dropbox, but I am going to make a video soon about the documentary I made. This really negatively impacted my mental health and my OCD, obviously. I felt like all these bad things were happening to me, and happening to my family, and I felt like we didn't deserve them. And I didn't understand why they were happening to us, and I didn't understand what would happen. At 13, you don't understand death. And for me specifically, I had not really experienced death up until that point. I had two grandparents die when I was very young, but I was so young that I can't even really remember it happening. I think I was like 2, 3. So I had never really experienced death, and also nobody really talked to me about death. Nobody really sat me down and explained to me like what could possibly happen. My parents were both going through a lot of cancer treatment, and trying to keep themselves alive. So they were really busy a lot of the time, and there wasn't a lot of sitting down and talking about it. It's not like we ignored it or anything, but there definitely wasn't enough explanation and checking in as a family, and as the kids in the situation for my sister and I. We both had our own kind of mental health journey from that point. My mental health journey from that point was severe OCD. When that happened, I became much more internal, even more internal. I kept things in even more from that point. I felt like my mom and my dad were physically ill, battling these really scary things, and I didn't want to add more to their plate. So I would never tell them if I was upset. I would always tell them I was fine if they asked me. I never asked them questions about the illness or questions about what would happen if one of them died or any of the questions I was afraid of. I never expressed myself in any kind of way toward them. I felt like they needed me to be okay. So that's what I focused on. I said, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to make sure I take care of myself so I don't have to burden my parents with another thing. So that is when my OCD really took off. I formed all these obsessions and intrusive thoughts surrounding my parents, especially my dad. My mom's cancer treatment was over pretty quickly. Luckily, she didn't need any chemo or anything like that. And also, luckily, my mom is a badass bitch. So she chose to just have a double mastectomy to make sure that she would never have breast cancer again. And she also, the other cancer she got diagnosed with was skin cancer. So luckily, they removed the part of her skin that had cancer and they didn't find skin cancer anywhere else. So luckily my mom very quickly, within a year or so, was cancer-free and has been cancer-free ever since. Blessed be. But my dad, on the other hand, had multiple myeloma. Multiple myeloma is incurable. It's really a horrible, horrible, horrible cancer, and my dad had a certain kind of multiple myeloma that's even worse than normal multiple myeloma. So my dad was never okay. He had periods of time where he was doing better than others, but he was never healthy ever again. From the moment he was diagnosed, he was either sick from the cancer or sick from the treatment. So that created a very unstable environment for me growing up. I felt terrified all the time. So to cope with that fear and that uncertainty of, is today the day my dad dies, I got even more obsessed with compulsions. My intrusive thoughts got even worse, and I was doing compulsions all the time. So that basically just heightened everything I talked about before that I started doing as a child. I was doing everything that I started doing as a kid even more. So I was doing the weird clock, not weird. I was doing the clock compulsions way more all the time. Sitting in class, I can remember just obsessively watching the clock or not watching the clock. And when I was not watching the clock, I was thinking about how I needed to not watch the clock. The bathroom stuff continued, and it kind of evolved into just new, different compulsions that were also in bathrooms. And I also started bringing my compulsions home. I think at first as a kid, all my compulsions had to do with being outside of the house. I was most stressed in public and around other people. So I, at first as a kid, was only doing compulsions when I was in public bathrooms, in stalls of public bathrooms. At school, I was doing a lot of compulsions in the classroom. Once I became 13, 14 and all this was happening in my life, that's when I started doing compulsions at home, because my home was no longer chill. My home was super stressful now too, because I came home to a sick dad, and sometimes a sick mom, depending on how close to her diagnosis we were. That's when I started doing the clock stuff at home too. I had an analog clock on my bedroom wall, and I used to have to look away from the clock at a certain time and then I could go to sleep. And if I messed it up, I would have to do it again. And on a bad day, even doing it right wouldn't make me feel satisfied. I would wait for the second hand to get all the way around and then back up to the 0, and then I would have to look away right when it was at the 0. And if I felt like I was even a little bit early or a little bit late, I would have to do it again. And sometimes even doing it once wouldn't be enough, and I would have to do it a couple times before I felt calm enough to go to sleep. And I can remember as a kid sitting there for like a half hour doing it over and over and over and over again. And at that age is also when I started to get obsessed with doors. That's when all of my checking started. So I would compulsively check things. And it started with the doors. So specifically my bedroom door. When I would go to sleep, I would have to touch the outside of my door before I opened it a certain number of times. I would have to touch the knob, and then I would have to open the door, which is a separate touch of the knob, and then I would have to close the door, touch the knob, and then I would have to look, and then I could go to bed. And I think it evolved over time, and it eventually became more involved than that. There were more steps to it that got added overall, but it was always about being obsessed with twos. So I would touch the knob twice on the outside, touch the knob twice on the inside, look away twice, look back at the door twice, and then I could go to sleep. And, well, not then I could go to sleep. Then I would get in bed, do the do the clock thing, and then I could go to bed. So sometimes it took me like an hour to go to sleep, just from the door stuff and the clock stuff. And then the bed stuff with like the blankets and my clothes. And then when I was around 16, 17 is when my OCD became just horrible. That is when it started to affect my functioning. I started having a lot of trouble finishing things, kind of finishing anything. I can remember that is when I stopped turning in homework and missing a lot of school. And I remember getting reprimanded for it. And I'm going to make a whole video about this at some point just because I have a lot to say. A lot of my compulsions had to do with school. I've never liked school environments. I think the United States has a really fucked up education system. Like I said, I went to a public school, and there are so many things I loved about going to a public school. I loved my school, don't get me wrong, I loved my school. So many things about it I think about and they make me so happy and they make me feel warm and fuzzy. And I love going to visit my school when I'm in my hometown. But school was never a safe place for me. I always felt on edge, I always felt uncomfortable. So as a teenager, that just got worse and worse as my OCD progressed, and as my dad got sicker and sicker. Nobody at school really knew my dad was sick, and some people knew my dad was sick, but they didn't really know what that meant. They thought he had cancer, but he was fine, but that's not really true. He was never really fine from the age of 13 until he died when I was 21. He was never fine. It was just varying degrees of bad. So at 16, I can remember my school-related compulsions getting really, really, really bad. I used to have this thing, and I'm actually really proud of myself for this, but I used to have this thing with typing where I would have to like retype something so many times. Like I can't even tell you a number. Like the amount of times that I would just give up and not continue to type because it was so stressful to try to finish typing something that it just wasn't worth it. I was always a really good student. Like I said, I was very quiet to myself, so I was very happy to just like sit alone and do my homework, or sit quietly in class and listen, So I was always a really, really good student. And then at 16, 17 is when I started becoming a really bad student. And honestly, I don't even really know how I graduated high school. But I stopped turning in homework. I started missing a lot of class. And that was literally just because of my OCD. And I didn't even know that at the time. I thought I was just like a crazy person with problems. I can remember sitting in the study hall that I had. It was in a study hall that had computers. It was like a computer room, but it was a study hall. So we could do whatever we wanted on the computers for that study hall. And I would always have homework, because it's high school and they work you to the bone. And I took a lot of AP classes, so I always had a lot of work to do. And I can remember specifically that we used to, for one of my AP history classes, we used to have to type out this packet of information every single unit that we had. So there would be like 10, 12 packets a year that we would have to completely type out on the computer. This was basically my worst nightmare. I would sit in that study hall and be typing, back, type it again, back, type it again, back, type it again, literally the whole study hall. And then I would get done after 45 minutes, the bell would ring for me to go to the next class, and I would look at what I had done, and I would have one page of this like 25-page packet done, and I would look to my peer next to me who was also in that class, and she would be done. She'd be done with the whole packet. And I would be sitting there like, I just did one page. And it was just this obsessive thing where I couldn't continue. There's just that feeling of I typed that wrong, or oh that was like you could have typed that better, or like oh you hit one wrong letter so you got to backspace the whole sentence and do it again. Or like I used to have this thing where, and it's so hard to describe these things, but I used to have this thing where when I was typing, if I accidentally hit the wrong letter, then I would have to add another of that letter. Like I'd have to type a second one because the first one couldn't be alone. I had all this obsession with things being alone. So that's why I was obsessed with even numbers. Everything had to have a pair. Everybody had to have somebody that they went with, so no one was alone. So if I was typing, like say I was typing out a homework packet and the word was hello, and maybe I typed HELPLO, I'd be like, oh, I typed an unnecessary P. So I would type another P so the two P's that I needed to delete would have each other. Like I felt like I had all these obsessive thoughts about if I delete that P, like if I delete that letter, where does that letter go? That letter needs to have like another letter like it to be deleted with. Like I felt like I couldn't just delete the one letter. So that was another thing. I wasn't just retyping things. I was like counting the letters I had to delete and making sure that they were even, and making sure that they were even pairs of the same letters. I feel insane saying this. I hope you understand that. But I'm really proud of myself because I don't do that anymore. That's something that I've really gotten over. But honestly, I just try to avoid typing because of that. Because if I am really stressed on a particular day, I will start to do it again. So I usually just handwrite things, or I will speak. Like I record myself a lot instead of typing because I don't have any obsessions or compulsions with speaking or with handwriting things. And again, I'm going to make a whole video about this, but like I can remember getting yelled at for turning things in late, getting yelled at for just not having my homework done and things. And it's so funny in retrospect because like if that happened to me now, I would literally just straight up be like, I have a fucking mental illness. I have a disorder that makes it take 3 times as long to do something that most people can do in like 20 minutes. It's gonna take me an hour and a half to do what you just did in 20 minutes. And I'm getting yelled at in class. So it's like not only is my dad dying, I have severe OCD, I don't know I have OCD, and then also my teacher's yelling at me for having OCD. So it was like a shitstorm. It was just like the perfect storm of stuff to make my OCD thrive and thrive and thrive, because nobody could see what was really going on with me. And around this time is also when I started obsessively counting. So that is when I started obsessively counting everything. And again, I was obsessed with twos and I was obsessed with even numbers. And like I said, specifically pairs of 2. So I would obsessively count like the tiles on the floor as I walked through the school, the panels of the concrete on the sidewalk, I would obsessively count those. I would count heads of people in public. I would obsessively count like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Like I would just count things. I would also count like the ceiling tiles. I would count words on a board, like on a whiteboard. I would count how many words there were, and if they weren't even, I would keep counting until the teacher either added something or subtracted something so they would be even. So you can imagine there was a lot of time where I was in class and I looked like I was listening, but actually I was counting. So that really started to negatively impact my life also because I was never paying attention to things. I was always just counting in my head, counting. And this is again, something that was happening for me that nobody had any awareness of. I was just experiencing it internally, completely by myself in silence. And sometimes if I was really, really anxious, I wouldn't even count stuff. I would just in my head over and over again be like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Or I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like even numbers. I would just like count just to try to soothe myself, which of course doesn't work. So I didn't even necessarily need anything to count. I would just count in my head. And it's funny because I used to get made fun of in school for being like aloof and like uninterested, and people used to like tease me for not talking a lot or not paying attention to them or not participating. And I was always doing compulsions or having intrusive thoughts or having obsessive thoughts. So all those people who were teasing me, people that disliked me because I was aloof, I literally was having mental illness. Like I was having a mental disorder that kept me from participating socially and even academically. So that made it really hard too, to be misunderstood on top of all the mental disorder that I was experiencing. Teenage times for me were really, really hard. And school was really, really hard at the end. The last couple years of my school life was really difficult. And then when I was 18, I moved out of my parents' house, got my own apartment across the country for school. And right when I moved, I literally just got settled in my apartment. My dad almost died. We had a big scare where he had to get rushed to the hospital for an infection that he had in his leg. He had recently had a stem cell transplant, so he had absolutely no immune system. So he had a really, really bad infection and he couldn't fight it. So he got very, very sick very quickly. He was septic. His foot was black from kind of like the shin down. It was just black. He was hooked up to a ventilator, septic, and my mom called me telling me that he might die. You have to come home right now. So my sister and I, who also lives across the country with me, we hopped on a plane and got right back. But that whole experience where my dad almost died, he didn't die at that point. He lived for 3 more years and then he died when I was 21. But this scare of him almost dying when I was 18 is what really, it was like the last little feather on the scale that just tipped it completely, and made it so my OCD was keeping me from functioning in even the smallest ways. And when I was 18 is also when I went to a therapist for the first time. I went to a therapist, and on the very first visit, she told me that I have OCD. She diagnosed me at that point with depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder, along with something else that I'm not comfortable talking about right now, but maybe in the future. That was the first time I had been labeled with OCD. I didn't know much about OCD other than like the stereotypical stuff that people talk about with OCD until this therapist told me I had it and started to try to educate me on it. That is when I really started to become aware of the fact that I was mentally ill and this was a disorder I had that was impacting my life. I started going to the therapist because I realized that there was definitely something wrong. Up until I was 18, even though my compulsions were really, really bad and I was already having trouble functioning like in school and socially, it never really occurs to you that there could actually be something wrong. You just think you're kind of weird, or you just think you're stupid, or you're just fucked up. So until it got so bad that it was literally affecting my ability to make myself breakfast, my ability to brush my teeth in the morning, my ability to leave the house, that was when I was like, okay, I need to see a therapist because I can't continue to live this way. Around that time is also when I started experiencing a lot of suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation. I felt just hopeless because my OCD was running my life so much that I was just miserable 24/7, just completely miserable, just terrified all the time. And I felt like my own brain was trying to hurt me. OCD is like your brain trying to protect you from things, but it doesn't realize that it's just creating more problems. It's not helping. So it felt like I couldn't even trust myself. Like my own brain wanted to hurt me. That's how I felt. So that is when I started to feel really like I couldn't live anymore if it was going to continue like that. So I started to see a therapist. I would say from 18 to 22, my OCD was horrifically bad. I can remember having multiple times where I would be doing a compulsion so many times, and it would never feel satisfying. Like, I would never feel done with the compulsion. So I would just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it to try to calm my brain and get rid of these intrusive thoughts. And they just wouldn't. So I would keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And I can remember so many times, like countless times, where I would just get so frustrated that I would just break down and cry. Like, I would just give up and just fall to the ground and just sob because it was so exhausting. You know, when your own brain is telling you you're not safe, no one around you is safe, something bad could happen any minute, it's really hard to find even a sliver of peace and happiness and calm. So I was just living in that place of, I can't do anything. I can't. I'm just like paralyzed. And I remember my OCD got so bad that I was doing compulsions throughout every single part of my day. I was waking up in the morning. My whole morning routine was compulsions. And it would take me like an hour to be done in the bathroom in the morning because I would have to turn the sink on and off a certain amount of times. If I was taking a shower, I would have a whole set of compulsions for the shower. So everything took forever. I would have to, if I turned a light on or off, I would have to turn the light switch on and off a certain number of times. I had to compulsively check the stove, the oven. I would have to compulsively check all the windows. I would have to compulsively check the doors. And all my compulsions that were strictly for in public came home with me at that point too. I was counting even when I was at home. I was counting objects. I was counting if there were bricks in a building. I was counting the bricks. I was counting the tiles. I was counting the wood panels on the floor. I was just counting. And getting ready for things was really, really hard. I would have to obsessively check myself multiple times. I would have to do certain things to get ready multiple times, even though I had already done them. It was just really hard to leave the house. And when I left the house, I would have to check the door many, many times. I would have to unlock and relock it multiple times. I also started to become obsessed with volume. So I, like on the TV or on my phone, I would have to turn the volume on to an even number, and if the numbers, like, you know how some volume things, like on the iPhone, the volume thing, it used to have like little squares. Like every time you hit it up, it would add a square, add a square, add a square. So I used to count the squares, and they had to be an even number of squares. And even if they were an even number of squares, I would still go down, 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 all the way to 0. And then I would go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or how many I wanted. That was an even number. And if I felt like I needed to do it again, which I always did, I would do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. So there was no peace. Every single moment of every single day, I was thinking about an obsession. I was doing a compulsion. Just my life was consumed by it. And that's also when I started to develop a lot of OCD about my body. I started to develop a lot of body awareness that was hyper aware. So I would get really hyper fixated on my heartbeat or hyper fixated on my breath. And I would get these intrusive thoughts about, like, if you do this, like if you breathe a certain way, if you breathe too deeply, your heart's gonna stop. Or like you're gonna stop breathing in like any minute, like right now. And that's also when I started having anger attacks. Anger attacks are like panic attacks in that they come on suddenly most of the time, and it feels like the end of the world. Just your whole physical body panics. But the difference between an anger attack and a panic attack is usually with a panic attack, you feel like you're gonna die. Usually you feel like something's wrong with your body and you're gonna die. Like you're just panicking. Your body is just panicking. You're in that fight or flight mode where you're panicking. An anger attack is similar, but it's different in that the focus is more anger and frustration. So when I would get really, really stressed and my compulsions just weren't satisfying me, which was most of the time for these few years from like 18 to 22, I would reach this point emotionally where it was like I would just snap and I would have an anger attack. And An anger attack is not necessarily, at least I'm just going to speak of my experience. I don't know how other people's experience with anger attacks is, but my experience of anger attacks is that all my anger is directed at me. It's not directed at other people. When I would have an anger attack, all my thoughts would be about being angry with myself. If there were people around, I might lash out at them, or I might yell at them, or I might say something really mean, but I would never get physically angry with them or come at them in any kind of way. I would just try to be alone, and then I would unleash all my anger on myself. So that's the difference between an anger attack and a panic attack. A panic attack is more so just, I'm panicking, I'm dying, and an anger attack is more so like an explosion of self-hating thoughts, at least, and feelings. At least that's how it was for me. That's how I experienced it. And I can remember this period of time, I would also, cancel plans a lot. I would miss class a lot for, like I was in high school. That continued. I had a lot of trouble getting the things on time. And I would have to make up some excuse, like I got in a car accident, or I'm feeling sick, at the last minute. I would have to cancel plans a lot because I just couldn't get ready on time, or I couldn't leave the house on time. I just felt like I was a pathetic turd, honestly. I couldn't even brush my teeth like a normal person. I couldn't walk out the door. I couldn't just walk out the door. I had to open and close the door, 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 lock it, unlock it, lock it, unlock it, lock it, unlock it, walk away, look back, look back, look back, look back, look back, look back. I shit you not. That was me at my worst OCD time. And even now, still today, if I'm having a really particularly stressful day, or I'm just feeling particularly stressed and upset, I still am doing those things from time to time. It's not nearly as bad as it used to be, but I still have those things that pop up when I'm stressed or when I'm upset. So I just felt like I was so broken. I remember having thoughts I can't even fold laundry. Folding laundry isn't hard. I can't even fold laundry. And I just felt so pathetic because it's such a simple task. And there's no rational reason why I'm doing these compulsions. And I can factually know that the number of times I open and close a door does not have anything to do with if one of my cats dies. I know that factually. But when my brain says to me, if you don't do this a certain number of times, your cat's gonna die, I have that whole fear response. I can't just ignore that because my brain is telling me it's true. So I do the compulsion to try to make the scary thought go away. But then the scary thought doesn't go away. It just comes back more. And then so I'm doing more compulsions. And you see how these things feed each other. And then, stressful things were going on in my life, so that made it even worse. They just fed each other. The stress of my life and OCD were just feeding each other, to the point where it just consumed my entire being. That's also when I developed a lot of, with jars and containers, I have to open and close them a certain number of times. Still to this day, that's something I can't shake. If I open a jar, I will, when I go to close it, I will close it all the way, and then I'll, I have to, open, close, a certain number of times. So that's something I developed at that point also. And as my dad's illness got worse and worse, a lot of my OCD started to center more around him, and making sure that he stayed alive. So a lot of my thoughts were, if you don't do this, your dad's gonna die. If you don't do this, your mom's gonna text you that he's in the hospital again. When I was 18 to 21, my dad was in the hospital, at least once a month. He was either there for a one-day little thing or a couple nights. There were even a few stays where he was there for like a week or two. So there was a lot of bad news, a lot of constant bad news. You know, like my mom would text me and be like, his platelets are low again, can't do surgery today, gonna try again tomorrow. You know, like stuff like that. Just endless bad news. In that period of time, my dad broke a lot of bones also, so he stopped being able to walk. He had part of his leg amputated during that time, so a lot of stressful procedures, a lot of scary moments, and a lot of uncertainty. And all of that really fed my OCD. And around that time is also when I started to develop intrusive thoughts that were way more scary than any intrusive thoughts I'd ever had before. I still to this day will have like if I'm driving a car, I will have a lot of intrusive thoughts about like, what if I kill someone? Like, what if I kill someone? Like, what if I run someone over? And then I'll have this whole nightmare scenario in my head of me, like, getting arrested, like, having to talk to the cops, going to therapy for it, like, trying to cope with it. I'll just have this whole line of thinking where I'm playing out this whole scenario in my head of I just murdered someone on accident. I'll have a lot of intrusive thoughts about if I'm driving other people in the car. I'll have a lot of intrusive thoughts about like, what if I crash the car and everyone in the car dies but me? I always have that. Like, my OCD is always really centered around everyone else. It's never really me. Sometimes it's me, but most of the time I have a lot of intrusive thoughts about me accidentally killing someone, which is very OCD. I used to think I was like completely insane for having thoughts like that, which I kind of am, but that's a very common OCD thing, having intrusive thoughts like that. There's this one TikTok that really gets me, where the girl is like, all my friends being anxious about getting on the plane, like, what if someone hijacks the plane? Ah! And then the person with OCD being like, what if I hijack the plane? That is what it's like, having intrusive thoughts and having OCD. Everyone's anxious about one thing, and I'm anxious that I'm the one who's gonna do the thing. I'm anxious that it's my fault that the thing's gonna happen. And then after my dad died, when I was 21, that is when the dust kind of settled and it became clear that like, this is something I'm gonna have to cope with. This is something that I'm gonna have to heal as much as possible and work with instead of against. You know, all that stress of when is my dad gonna die, when is my dad gonna die was gone because he had died. And you know, my compulsions didn't make it go away. They didn't make it stop. They didn't save him. He still died. From that point, I really started on my journey with my mental health. I'm trying to take care of myself and love myself. Veenie, I am crying about death and mental illness. So around that time is when I started, it's actually when I found Reiki. So I started giving myself daily Reiki treatments, which helped so much, so much. I also went to a lot of grief therapy. I was in 2 different grief support groups over the course of like a year and a half, I think. I found a new therapist, which I'm not seeing anymore. I'm looking for a new therapist now. But so I started implementing all these things to try to help myself and try to kind of reclaim my life. And so much of my life up to that point had been consumed by illness and fear that I was trying to teach myself that bad things don't happen all the time. At least they're not supposed to. From my brain's perspective, bad things happen every Tuesday. Or like every other week. Because they were happening every other week for like 8 years. So I kind of had to retrain my brain, and I'm still doing that. I think I'll be doing that for the rest of my life, honestly. So after my dad died, slowly, very slowly, my OCD has improved. I've learned how to cope with it much better. I have tools, and I've just gotten better at recognizing my own OCD, my own compulsions, my own obsessive thoughts, my own intrusive thoughts. I've got better at rationalizing with myself. I've got better at doing exposure therapy, which is where you try to not do the compulsion, which is very, very hard. And it's something that you cannot just jump right into. And it's something that I can only, you should only try to do that when you're feeling like you're in a good place. If I'm feeling particularly vulnerable or stressed or anxious or whatever, then I don't try to do that to myself. I just let myself do the compulsion. But if I'm feeling particularly strong and healthy that day, I will say to that thought, I've actually named my OCD. His name is Jeff. He lives in my brain. His name is Jeff. He is really, really scared. He really wants to protect me and he doesn't know how, and that really scares him too. And so he spitballs all these things all the time to try to help me. So I will, when he says foolish things, like, if you don't do this, then this person's gonna die, or if you don't do this, your house is gonna catch on fire, I will just say to him, how do you know that? How do you know that? And then inevitably he doesn't have a reason. He can't explain himself because it's irrational. And then I'll say, usually literally out loud, I will say this. I will say, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that you're trying to support me and keep me safe. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But doing this is not going to help. And then I try to really let those words sink in and not do the compulsion. Again, I can't do that all the time. Sometimes I feel like I just have to do the compulsion, which is completely fine. And maybe we can talk about in future videos the other ways that I cope with my OCD, if you guys are interested in hearing that. But nowadays, my OCD is much, much more manageable. I, of course, still have my little compulsions that I can't seem to shake. I still, of course, have my intrusive thoughts. I do still do a lot of counting, especially in public. Most of my compulsions are in public because I feel much less safe in public, but I do still do several compulsions and have intrusive thoughts when I'm in my home. But luckily, my OCD is much more manageable now. Something that I have developed since my dad's death, though, that I did not have before, is an awareness of my body that I do not appreciate. I actually just recently learned of the term somatic OCD, which is kind of a hyper-awareness of the body's involuntary functions. So this is something that will happen to me quite a bit. Ever since my dad died, I have this intense fear that I'm just gonna drop dead. It just happened recently, actually, where I get really hyper-fixated on my heartbeat, and I become convinced that my heart's gonna stop, like any minute. Or I'll get really hyper-aware of my digestive system, and I'll feel like I can feel that something is broken, or that something has ripped, or that something's out of place. Or I'll get just very aware of my body in ways that I don't think most people can understand, where I feel like I will literally get so hyper-focused on my body that I will start, like, without even really realizing it, like, visualizing my insides and, like, seeing that something bad is happening, or, like, seeing that something's wrong in my digestion, or something's wrong, like, in my lungs. Like I said, I'll have, like, intrusive thoughts that are like, if you take a deep breath, your heart's gonna explode. Like, they're that irrational. So that is one unfortunate thing that I have developed. I've developed a lot of health anxiety watching my dad's illness. Like, even, like, I was gonna start donating blood as offering to one of my deities that I work with, and then I went to donate blood, and it was such a stressful and scary and anxiety-provoking experience for me that I'm never gonna do it again. Which is really unfortunate, because I really wanted to help in that way, but I just don't think it's something I can do at this point in my life. Maybe in the future I'll feel comfortable doing it. Anything medical sets me on edge. It just really sets my anxiety aflame, because I just watched my dad go through so many horrific medical things that now it's just my worst fear. I do also, something that I developed from when I was 18 to now, when my dad got, because like I said, he had an infection because he couldn't battle it, because he had had a stem cell transplant. So something I developed during that time, because of that infection he had, I got some contamination OCD mixed in there, which is something that I never used to have. So now something I really struggle with is germs. Not too badly in day-to-day life, but I struggle a lot with germs in specific situations. I am pretty claustrophobic, so I will sometimes get really contamination OCD if there's too many of us in a space. I'll feel like the air isn't clean and I can't breathe, and then I start to panic. I have a lot of trouble with public pools, especially public pools that have a lot of people in them. I just can't go in them. Just the thought of getting in them makes me want to crawl out of my own skin. I do have trouble also with, like, I can't take a bath. Every once in a while, I'll have a strong day and I'll manage to take a bath, but it's never a relaxing experience, so I've kind of just stopped trying because I never enjoy them. They always just make me feel gross and uncomfortable. So, unfortunately, I have developed some contamination OCD also. Again, there are so many different kinds of OCD, so if you want to know more about the different labels that OCD has, the different branches of it, you can research those. So, that is basically my OCD story. I feel like this is such a long video, so if you made it to this point, I love you forever. Thank you for watching. If you watched this, I really, really hope that this helps some people and just helps people feel less alone. If you struggle with OCD or you can relate to any of the things that I talked about, please comment down below and share a bit of your experience. I think it's really important to talk about things like this so it's not swept under the rug. And feeling alone is like half the battle with anything like this. So let's just get it out there. Just say it out loud. Get it out there into the group. Tell it to your OCD friends like me. And then we're not alone. We're together with our OCD. And tell me about your Jeff. What is your OCD fella like? What's their name? So if you enjoyed this upsetting video, give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you have mental illness and you're neurodivergent like me. I need more neurodivergent friends, so please subscribe to my channel. I want to very soon make videos about OCD and psychic abilities, OCD and intuition, intrusive thoughts and intuition, so those will be coming soon. Thank you to everyone that encouraged me to share more about my OCD. It wasn't easy, and I hope that it's well received. I am pretty scared to put this out there, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So I hope that this video leads to a bunch of us with OCD connecting and sharing our stories. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.